today that says 79 schools are pulling out of Bridget's breakfast clubs. So they can't make it work. The money doesn't stack up. They haven't been funded enough money and it doesn't work. There's not enough teachers, there's not enough food, there's not enough resources. It doesn't work. The ones that were existing, they did work. So the existing breakfast clubs that were in about 80% of schools that were being funded by charities and parents paying, as they used it, they were working. So that was good. But Bridget decided to move the goalposts, and she decided that everybody should have that for taxpayer free. So she brought in her own breakfast clubs, which are now undoing everything that the actual working existing breakfast clubs were doing. So we've said it before and we've said it again. Why is she trying to fix something that's not broken? So the net result of that is there was a £90 million social media campaign by the Department for Education. Now, it's not just on breakfast clubs for sure, but a massive chunk of that cash will have gone on to breakfast clubs. We've seen all the scripted kids going, I love it, it is great, my mum can go to work early. So we know they've spent quite a lot of money promoting it, trying to make you think that it's a good thing and that they care about you and they want to look after your child. The reality is, there is no money to pay for it. What was already there was working really well, but they're now not allowed to do that. So teachers are being asked to staff breakfast clubs when they should be teaching. I know, it's a novel idea. So that in itself has come to light, and that's a bit embarrassing. I mean, of course, Bridget won't ever address it, Keir won't address it, Rachel won't address it, Stephen Morgan, God, he can't address his own name. No one will address it, but we know that to be factual. We know that the breakfast clubs aren't working. There was also an interesting piece of advice. So this was sold to us on the fact that if you're hungry, you can't learn. If a child is hungry, they can't learn, and that there are too many hungry children in classrooms. Well, again, when you dissect that, what that means is 20% of parents in the UK struggle with the costs associated with sending their child to school. 80% don't. So we know this week that kids were having two breakfasts because they were all over the Jeremy Vine show and BBC News going, I had strawberries at home and then I had another breakfast. It was amazing. Yay! We know that parents were feeling, if you read the social media comments, parents were feeling bullied into taking their children to school earlier because they wanted to hang out with their mates, because it was basically a half an hour free for all. And that is where free does come into its exact context. So parents are going, well, hang on a minute. I used to get to school on time having given them breakfast, but now they want to go earlier. So I've got to get up earlier. I've got to give them their breakfast earlier and then get them to school earlier so they can go and have another breakfast that they don't eat and they won't want. Why? So that, of course, has been glossed over. No one's actually talking about that. No one's actually going, this is insane. And your average Joe taxpayer is beginning to say, why are we giving kids that don't need a breakfast? Why are we spending all of this money? Why did we spend the £90 million campaign? Why are we taking away money from actual resources? Why are the children who so desperately need our help and so desperately do need investment? Why is their investment being spread paper thin because we've decided that everyone must have it even though everyone does not need it? And then a piece of research was done, and when Bridget said that everybody needed to be able to eat to learn, a piece of research said it had absolutely no impact on attainment whatsoever, and it certainly didn't have any impact on the amount of breakfast actually ingested. So even by going to breakfast club, it didn't guarantee the child would eat. So effectively, it's failed on every level. But we're still seeing it being spouted all over the Department for Education website, Facebook, everything. They're trying to tell us it's a success. Yet the actual people, the parents and the teachers, the 80 schools that have pulled out of it, or 79 schools that have pulled out of it, and all of the parents that have in some way been involved in it and now going, that is rubbish, are telling us it doesn't work. But yet the government is refusing to admit that. And of course, they're refusing to admit that because if you dial this all back, where did they say they were going to get the money from? Well, they said they were going to get the money from VAT on education and the non-doms. I think they were supposed to be paying for this. And the 6,500 teachers that Bridget was talking about that you were going to get in state school, you are going to get 6,500 new teachers. And we broke that down to the fact that it meant an arm of a teacher in a school. You know, it wasn't actually 6,500 teachers, it was teaching assistants. And then we read in the papers at the minute that schools are not hiring new teachers anymore. And when a teacher's contract comes to the end, they're not renewing it. Now, I thought we needed 6,500 new ones. Do we not? Because that's what you sold VAT on education on. That's what you said VAT on education was going to pay. It was going to pay for breakfast clubs and teachers. But it's not. Because we know it's not, because the broad shoulders that could absorb all of the 20% VAT, of course, weren't broad, were they? And you knew that, Bridget and Rachel, because when you were told in advance of all of this, of when were you going to put it on, were you going to put VAT on education on in January, April or September or August, you said, let's do it in January. And they said, don't do that. That's the most disruptive time. And you said, yeah, I know, but we want the money. And it would be administratively onerous if we didn't do it later and we exempted send kids. So we'll do it then, just make our lives a bit easier. We'll take it out of our to-do box and put it in the school's to-do box. And of course, I mean, if we disrupt 54,000 children in the process, what's that? We're all going to get breakfast. Yay! So they knowingly proceeded with a policy that they told you was going to make money. But it hasn't. And we know that now because that came out in court. So we know from the High Court that they were told this, and they were told that if 10% of children moved, this would be net zero. Well, I think we're on 9%. So we know this great revenue creator has created no revenue. But what we also know is that there are children across the country who have had their education disrupted. And of course, you realise that once you've disrupted a child's education, you can't undisrupt it. You can't undo that. Once it's done, it's done. So we know that there are children now in overcrowded state schools, and we know the overcrowded state schools are even more overcrowded. We know that in the SEND sector, families are being told, don't even bother applying for an EHCP. You won't get it. And we can't afford it, even if we were to agree with what you think your child's needs are. We can't support that. We simply can't do it. We can't pay the fees for you to have your child back in the independent school, which is probably what we would recommend, but we can't recommend it because we don't have any money. So the SEND sector that Bridget Phillipson and Rachel Reeves both referred to the same report as the claimants in the High Court case referred to, although of course Bridget Phillipson and Rachel Reeves are allowed to know about it and use it, but anyone else is not. But that report that said SEND is absolutely on its knees, it can take no more, it is taking more, because Bridget Phillipson and Rachel Reeves knew that 54,000 children would move, and they knew that in that 54,000 children, many of them would have special educational needs and disabilities, and they do, and they've moved. So we are now looking at two women and Keir Starmer who have knowingly and wantonly disadvantaged children in state and children in private. What they wanted to do was disadvantage the independent sector. What they wanted to do was bring it down. What they wanted to do was eradicate it, because they all have an envy of it. They are all driven by their bitterness that they didn't get it, even though Keir Starmer did. But they are all so driven by their spite and their jealousy that they wanted to bring the independent sector down. And they knew that that would bring down children with it, both in state and independent. But because by abolishing that sector, it ticked their box. Did it make them happy? Will it make them happy? Of course it won't. What are they going to do next? Because once they've realised that children have suffered and paid a very, very, very high price, as have parents, as have teachers, as have families, what are they going to do then? What's the next thing? Because all they do is get enjoyment out of making your life and my life difficult. And I don't say that flippantly. But if you look at every single thing they've done and every group they've targeted, what's the common denominator? It's vulnerable. It's people on the down low. It's people that were just about keeping their heads above water. It's about people that were just doing their best and getting on with their lives. And it's about people that had dreams. Can't have them. And the successful people in this country, well, they've left. They don't want to be part of it anymore. So we don't say it flippantly. There must be some kind of joy and gratitude that they are getting, because they keep making these decisions and they keep forging forwards. And this country is in disarray, and it's in disarray because of those people at the top of the tree. So I tell you what, May the 1st can't come a day too soon for me. I realise it won't get rid of them, but it's the first stepping stone. This cannot be allowed to continue.